fantastic, but I think you both agree that we're kind of glad to be going on hiatus for a little bit, to get a rest from Zooming and focus on book selling and taking a short break before we plunge back in for 2021. Obviously, the usual, thank you all for coming, and I don't really need to say, but of course, this being a safe, creative space for everybody, everyone's going to be on their best behavior and no one's going to say anything rude that would require us to kick you out, but we will, so watch out if you get obstreperous. Looks like we're not going to have any technical problems this evening, but if you do, just click back in. That'll probably take care of whatever problems you have there. Let's see. So I said who I am. Our kind of celebrities here for the evening are Elly Blue, who's the marketing director from Microcosm Publishing, based down in Oregon, and Annie Carl, who is a bookstore owner and of the Neverending Bookshop outside of Seattle, and also the debut author of the new zine, which you probably already all know about since that's why you're here, called My Tropey Life. So I'll shut up and let Elly and Annie tell you all about the book. Book? Is it a book? We'll call it a zine, and how it came to be. So stand by, and as you have any questions after they get to talk a little bit, we'll let you chime in. Just sort of unmute and talk when it seems appropriate, and take it away, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James. It's really an honor to get to introduce Annie and her. I didn't actually realize, Annie, that this was your first publication. Is it your first?
I've had some articles published online in the past, but this is my first physical. Well, and actually, I'm a recovering journalist. So I had a lot of articles. I worked for the North Kitsap Herald over in Paulsbo right out of college from 2006 to 2008. And so I had a lot of articles about community events and goings-ons published there. This is a bit different.
It is. Well, congratulations on your first standalone unit of reading. Can we call it that? Sure. Otherwise known as a zine.
Yes.
Or a very small book that you can fold up and put in your pocket. So Annie, we met a long time ago before this zine. Actually, I believe we even bonded over the issues in this zine at PNBA. Do you remember that? It was a few years back.
That was my first PNBA in 2017. I had been open since 2015, but I had been a used bookstore for a year and a half. And then when I started bringing in new books, I joined PNBA and the ABA, and decided to go to their trade show for the first time that fall. And I met a lot of people, and I went to a lot of panels, and one of them was diversity in your bookstore. And I thought that would be really interesting to go to. And then I think I spent the rest of the trade show ranting about it because they included everything. They did a really great job. That's not to say they didn't do a good job. They did a really great job, but they did not include disabilities at all. And I think I made that and that was, so a little backstory on me for those of you who don't know me so super well. I was born with a rare spinal birth defect called lipomeningomyocele. I think my mom knows how to spell it. I still have to look it up. And that is literally a fatty mass. It's pretty teeny, but on an infant, that's pretty huge. At the base of my spine that tethered my spinal cord to my spinal column. I was born with a closed spine, so it wasn't spina bifida, which a lot of people think when I say spinal birth defect. 1 in 4,000 children are born with this birth defect a year. So it's not as rare as I originally thought, but it's still fair. It's not as common as like spina bifida. And it's a neurotube defect, so it's genetic. So when I was pregnant and I had my first ultrasound for Calvin where they showed his spine, I was like, can you please just check? They were very accommodating, and that was a huge relief. And then when I was 24, I was diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, unrelated to my spinal birth defect. So I am bald. I developed hydrocephalus from treatment, so I have a shunt. And I also walk with a limp. My cesarean for my son was my 20th surgical procedure. Now this zine, I really want to clarify, this zine is about physical disabilities. Amazingly enough, I have medically related PTSD, and that's kind of it on the mental health spectrum. So I wrote what I know about, and that's physical disabilities. I didn't really include deaf or hard of hearing, even though I'm 85% deaf in this year. So I really just wrote about physical disabilities because that's what I've experienced in my life. So that's what this zine sort of focuses on.
Can you give us like an overview of like, what do you mean when you say disability? And I think you might have a reading to go along with that question.
Yes, I do. Indeed, I do. So actually, every single person who has attended this event has either been disabled or will be in their future. For me, disabilities more or less are tied physical disabilities. It's a hard thing to say. We age, right? And as we get older, we start seeing the doctor more. We start noticing that our bodies get creakier and it's a little harder to roll out of bed in the morning. And maybe our teeth grind a certain way and we have to go see the dentist. And as we get older, we need more help. So disabilities to me is basically our bodies and our minds not working the way we hope they will. So everyone is going to have a disability, whether temporary or permanent, in their lifetime. If you break a bone, that's a disability. If you wear glasses, that's a disability. If you have alopecia, that's a disability. Some of us are more visible than others. There's neuroatypical disabled people in the world. There are people who have massive mental disabilities in the world that those aren't visible. But I think everyone at some point in their life will experience disability. I think even the Iron Nun who still runs marathons, I think, probably has to deal with that. So disabilities, I was going to look up the dictionary.com definition of it, but really, honestly, it's just not having a perfect body, no matter how hard you try. You know, some of us are obese, some of us are chubby, COVID chubby, right? Some of us were born with their disabilities. Some of us develop our disabilities. Some of us break a leg when we're 9 years old and have to wear a cast. Some of us fall down the stairs when we're 82 and have to have a hip replaced. So I think literally anything that impairs the body or the mind is a disability. So sorry to burst all your bubbles, but we're all gonna have to deal with it someday. And especially, sorry.
Oh, and I was going to say, and this is one of the things I think you talk about really well in your zine, is that you kind of talk about how representation of disability in pop culture really does kind of come from the fear of that, or from the perspective of able-bodied, however temporarily, people, of their own bodies. Could you tell us more? Or perhaps you have already selected a...
I have a little paragraph that I want to share from the zine that sort of plays into this. It's more about vocabulary and people who have gone through kind of my experiences, and maybe people who haven't, who have been healthy their whole lives, who haven't had to think about health insurance every time they switch jobs or go to college or go off their parents' insurance. So let's see. I also have one that's about COVID, because I think this year, a lot of people who are healthy, like 95% of the time, are experiencing what those of us who grew up with disabilities or developed disabilities have experienced our whole lives. And it's very dividing, as we've all seen. It's very charged and emotional for a lot of people. There's been a lot of abuse of the ADA and HIPAA, which I'll get to. But this first section is about vocabulary, which we all work with, I think, on a regular basis. The discourse between medical professionals and their patients is a tricky one at best and harmful at worst. Most Americans don't receive anything close to a health education that informs them about their bodies or how to relate to what happens when things go wrong. When you can't even get a reliable and genuine representation of disabled characters in communities, how can you expect people to have the vocabulary to discuss when their bodies don't work the way expected? The gaps in our education make it incredibly difficult to learn how to advocate for ourselves on many levels and in many different ways. Health is just one example. One should not need a medical education degree or medical license to be able to talk about one's body intelligently. I think if our society valued, supported, and fought for disabled characters the way it's done for able-bodied, beloved characters, we would start to see a shift in the value of all kinds of bodies, not just fully functional bodies, which I honestly think is a myth perpetuated by movies, television, and fiction, but all bodies as they are. As more people read and view different folks with their abilities and limitations, these disabilities will hopefully start to become more mainstream, not just a side story arc. So I think that our society and our culture has really set us up for this exact moment in time when people are, and at the start of the pandemic, were terrified. They'd cough and be like, no, wait, I'm not sick. I just have allergies. And it's like, if we had a better structural education system, one, teachers are amazing, love them. My best friend is a teacher and she's amazing at it. I have a lot of friends who are teachers and they're amazing, amazing people. But I think that our widespread educational system and the fight against like proper sex education, which should start, I think, in kindergarten, right age, think about kindergartners and, but learning proper vocabulary and learning about, something's going wrong in your body, just basic anatomy. I grew up learning about my body. So when something goes wrong, or I think something goes wrong, my husband's really good at talking me down from that, which I love him for. After I was finished with my cancer treatment, I had a long time, and still sometimes do, where I would panic over the smallest thing happening to my body. But I have learned how to talk about my body. I couldn't talk about any of yours, but I know about my own experiences, and I know how to shut down a doctor who's ready to tell me that I don't know what I know. So
I'm sorry that you have to have that skill set, but yes, as I'm in an interabled relationship and have witnessing the things that doctors will say to somebody. It's
just because you have a medical license doesn't mean you get to shoot your mouth off however you want.
Yes.
No.
Well, let's talk about other people who do have a license to shoot their mouth off however they want, which is people who write books and movies and people who are creative. Often, and really, like I'd say the sort of core of your zine is about looking at the most common stereotypes, and I don't even want to say stereotypes, just like ordinary depictions of disabled people in books and movies. And they really tend to fall into like about 3 different categories. Can you tell us like what those are? And we have a lot of booksellers here, so can you give us like a sense of like red flags to look for when we're like looking for representation?
Yes, I can. And just as a side note, I've cultivated a small 4-shelf section that's my disability and fiction section that has positive representation. And if I have a list of all of the books that are in that, if you want a list, my email address is theneverendingbookshop@gmail.com. Send me an email. I'll send you the Google Doc. I'm so happy to share it with like everyone. Until recently, I had the Cormoran Strike series on there, and I have since sent it back to the publisher because that's a whole nother topic. But it has really great representation for amputees. So if you have someone coming in who is looking for something like that, and you don't have J.K. Rowling qualms, or not too many J.K. Rowling qualms, potentially consider that. So my book is broken into, my zine is broken into 3 sections. And when I first wrote this, it was actually an essay for a magazine that defunct before it was published. And I sort of framed it as Kiss, Fuck, Marry. In this case, it was cure, kill, villain. And these are some of the 3 really popular tropes for disabled characters in both fiction, movies, TV. Curing and curing by killing is a really, really toxic trope. There's actually, I let my little thing go black here. There's a really great test. It's sort of like the Bechdel test for women in movies and media and fiction. And we in the know call it the Kenny Freeze test. He's an American author, and he also advocates for LGBTQIA rights. He's disabled. He's fantastic. I recommend everything he's ever written. But he created a test in the 90s for disabled people in fiction and media. And the work needs to have more than one disabled character. The disabled characters need to have their own narrative purpose other than the education and profit of a non-disabled character. The character's disability should not be eradicated either by curing or killing. So that is the test that all the books that are in my disability in fiction section are put up against, and for the most part, they pass. I do have some books in there that didn't pass every single one, but there are so few really, really good books about disabilities that I can't afford not to have some that are like subpar. If you put me before you in your disability and fiction section, I will come to your store, tear it down, and rip it into 1,000 pieces. That is the epitome of toxic tropes.
So what is the trope exactly? Like this?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the trope in that book is this young man is disabled I think he's a young party goer, rich young man. He's in a car accident. He becomes quadriplegic. His parents are at their wits' end. They're very loving parents. They take care of him, but he just wants to commit suicide. He's so tired of being in his body. He doesn't want to be in his body anymore. And they hire a young woman to be his companion, and they fall in love. And then he decides to commit suicide anyway, so he can leave her his money. Yeah, that's like the basic outline of it. And I was so horrified because I love romance. And so I read this book and I was like, oh boy, this is going to be, and I got to the end of it and I was like, the fuck was that? Sorry, there's a lot of language, I swear. I got to the end of it and was like, that's not okay. That's like if you have a gay character, and there would be massive outcry if someone published a book with a gay character who killed themselves because they were gay. That's literally what this book is. Or a person of color who killed themselves because they're a person of color. That's literally what this book is. And then they made a movie of it. And I actually just had a customer order it from me. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this because customer service, but God. So toxic tropes are it's sometimes called bootstrapping. Where the disabled character is there to hold up the able-bodied character. The best friend, the plucky best friend. If you've read Jonathan Evison, The Fundamentals of Caregiving, which is a great book. It's a really great book, but the main character is held up by the disabled character. He feels good because he has driven this disabled character around in his car and given him the ride of a lifetime, right? He's had all these experiences because the able-bodied character offered to drive him around, right, and take him on a road trip. So it's a tough, twiny, complicated subject, as with anything that is not of the ordinary, right? That's not normal, which our movies and our television and our books love to harp on. And I don't think there is such a thing. And I think that disabilities fall last. We hardly ever hear about them. And when we do, it is in this stereotypical way. The other way is to cure or kill your character, or vilify them. So think of Captain Hook from Peter Pan, my mom's favorite book. He has a hook. He's an amputee, and you know he's an amputee, and you know he's the bad guy because he's missing a hand. You know, and even now, screenwriters are counseled to. It's like the cowboy hats. Who's wearing the white hat? Who's wearing the black hat? So screenwriters are actually mentored to give their villains some sort of physical or mental disability, which is horrifying. You know, and there are some, I write about, one of my sections today is not about horror films, but I do write about horror films in the zine and how hurtful and hateful they are for people with disabilities.
So we've talked about some harmful stereotypes and also talked about some red flags and like how can you tell if a book is probably gearing up to be not a great representation.
Yeah.
Equating someone's character with what they look like is a pretty good one.
Yeah.
And then you've also given us a sort of a green flag test, like how many disabled characters are there, and are they their own people or just there to support other people? And then what was the third one?
Oh,
the freeze test.
Their disability should not be eradicated by curing or killing.
Yes, very basic. And
Very basic.
Maybe and if they're a villain, make them a complicated villain.
Right. And there's a lot of horror movies that are coming out. Not a lot. There's a few horror movies coming out where it's not about like Jason coming to rip your face off or whatever. I don't watch horror movies because they're too scary for me. But there are horror movies coming out like The Quiet Place, I think that's right, and Bird Box, where it's not people who are the scary part. It's other beings, or it's apocalypse, or I mean, if you even think about X-Men and mutants and good mutants and bad mutants, and that's another that's a complicated trope, because you have the good mutants. I'm such a nerd.
Bring it on.
You have good mutants, and then you have bad mutants who abuse their power and don't have humanity's best hope. I mean, superheroes, it's rife with disabilities are all through our culture and society, and we're also the most ignored, marginalized minority. I think because there's not one group that you can point to and say, well, there's the disabled group. It's not like people of color where you can say, well, there's the black people, and black authors, and we're also the one minority that intersects all the others. And I mean, intersexual, I mean, there can be gay black men and white disabled women. And I'm very privileged. I'm a white person with disabilities. I've always been privileged. My parents, though, times they struggled financially to provide my medical care. I have never been, it's been a complicated path for me, but I've never had the issues that a lot of people of color have. Disabled people of color is a whole different ballgame. And I can't speak to that because I'm white and very privileged in my whiteness. But if you have a chance to look up people of color who are also disabled on Twitter or even Instagram, it's horrifying, absolutely horrifying. Our healthcare system in this country is horrifying. So I got off track.
Can you recommend us some books, Annie?
Yes.
What are some books that do a good job of this? And I think you might have a reading to do here also.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure if it's, yeah, I do. So I'm going to share with you the first book I ever read that's out of print now, that also goes along with my nerdiness. No judgments here. All right. The first book I ever read with positive representation was Lightsabers by Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Moesta. It's the fourth book in the Young Jedi Knights series following Han Solo and Princess Leia's twins, Jacen and Jaina. This is, of course, before the old canon was tossed and replaced with our current Star Wars stories, another article for another time. In Lightsabers, Tunnel Ka, one of the main characters, builds a faulty lightsaber. It explodes, making her an amputee. She goes through a grieving process, then gets right back up and works out how to become a Jedi with one arm. After this book, the rest of the series focuses on Tunnel Ka learning how to become a Jedi. At 12, this book changed my life and let me know that I wasn't the only one who was an other. Unfortunately, in 1996, this was the only book to do so. All the other stories I blasted my way through either had white, straight, and able-bodied characters with terminal disabilities, or the person with the disability was framed as the villain. So I have a couple different copies of Lightsabers because my first copy from when I was 12 is so battered because I read it so many times. And I don't think I knew why when I was 12, but now as 36-year-old, I understand why. Because that was the first time I was seeing a disabled character who was allowed to be disabled, but also problem solve her way through her disability after she became an amputee. And she had a grieving process. You know, she's a teenager and she was allowed to figure out her own path, and she was allowed to grieve that her arm was gone. I'm not sure there's enough in our culture and society. We're not allowed enough grieving time for a lot of things. And I never knew as a child, and even still as an adult, it's sometimes hard to know that I'm allowed to grieve about things in my life that have happened to me. I'm allowed to explore the trauma. I still have trauma from when I was a child and from my cancer fight. It's, I've never been sexually assaulted, harassed for sure. But this was my trauma. And I in writing this zine and continuing with my own writing, I'm exploring that trauma. And so this was the first book that I ever read as a child that sort of helped me understand that I was allowed to be a person and not just a disabled trope. And I didn't really understand that at 12. You know, at 12, you're kind of thinking, oh man, I hope the popular girl at school likes me. And that kid in that other class is super cute. But as a 36-year-old, I now understand kind of why I was so attached to this book for so long, and still am. The writing is atrocious. Kevin J. Anderson is not the best writer ever, but this book meant a lot to me, and still does. Some other really great books, the Cactus series by Dusty Bowling, about a girl with no arms. I love that. It's I think it's 2 books. I hope she writes more because this character is just amazing. Now, Dusty Bowling, it's not an Own Voices story, but she did her fucking research. That is the other thing that I really want to drive home to writers. This is why I love talking to writers groups. If you're going to write about something that you don't know about or don't experience regularly, fucking do your research. Like, for reals. So she did. And she talked to doctors, and she talked to people, and she talked to people who had one arm or no arms, who were doing the things that her main character does. And I just loved it. And in the second book, she gets a crush, and she has a crush on a boy. And there's such great books. Most of the books that I really love that have great representation are often children's books. And I find that the children's industry is a little bit more open to differences in books. And it's when you start getting into YA and adult books where they're starting to branch out into people of color and LGBTQIA sort of in a big way. You know, all of these books that are being auctioned and we're reading about in Publishers Weekly, I very rarely see any books by disabled people there. Some of the good ones I've really loved that are nonfiction are Disability Visibility. Alice Wong is the editor for that one. And the other one is What Can a Body Do by, it's on my shelf, by Sarah Hendy. And that one is about how how our world was not built for people like me. Getting up a 4-inch curb is impossible for me. Going to PNBA was very challenging at first. I can't stand in lines. Standing for me is very hard. I have fused ankles with hardware in them. So after a few minutes of standing, I'm like teetering around, my balance is shit. So that's a really great book that examines how the built world was not designed for people with disabilities. My screen went black again. So if you want that list of fiction, just shoot me an email and I'll send you the Google Doc. I've shared it with a lot of people, so.
I know I want it. And so let's switch gears and talk about bookstores. Mm-hmm. As a bookstore owner, can you offer advice to your fellow booksellers about first, well, big picture, we won't always have COVID with us. What can booksellers do to improve accessibility in their shops and their online presence at events? Like what's on your dream wish list for that?
Well, and I think a lot of booksellers and bookstores are already pretty kind of doing some of the things suggested. In 2018, after that first diversity panel, I was lucky enough to do my own panel about disabilities, both in fiction and in bookstores, with Nicola Griffith and Kate Ristow, who's a good friend of mine. And that was a fantastic panel. We had so much fun just tearing into disabilities and representation, much like I do in my zine. And we also talked about how to make your bookstore not just compliant, not just ADA compliant, but comfortable. And so I would say if you can do something to like blindfold yourself and think about being blind, and think about not being able to hear, like put on a pair of headphones. Think about not being able to walk very far, and think about like your elderly customers who can't walk very far, or someone like me who I can walk, but walking is not my preferred mode of transportation. I rode horses from the time I was 13 until I got pregnant with my kid. I love horseback riding because they go so fast. It's like my favorite thing ever. I never learned how to ride a bike. Do
you have advice for horse accessibility for bookstores?
Yeah, you should let what is it? Seeing eye horses, and they're actually miniature horses. For seeing eye horses are such a thing. So if someone shows up with their miniature seeing eye horse, don't turn them away. It's an actual program. So I would just think about, maybe having chairs by your entrance, a place where someone can lean. If you have a large parking lot and they're had to park at the back because it's the holidays, and it's holidays and COVID. Think about having some places where people can sit. I know we're not encouraging lingering right now, but for the future, are your bathrooms ADA compliant? Do they have grip rails? Do they have good grip rails? I once pulled a grip rail right out of the wall, and I had a cast on, and I landed on that cast, and it was not good. And so make sure that you've got good hardware. Some of it is expensive. Some of it is not putting a few extra chairs out at the front of your store. That can make sure that there are ramps in the parking lot. And if there aren't, how can you amend that? How can you figure that out? If your building is historic and has stairs with no railings, I can't go upstairs without railings. And so many houses in Seattle don't have railings up to their front porch. I can't tell you how many stairs I've butt scooched up, and how shame-filled I was at having to do that because I didn't have any other option. I was going to a barbecue at that house, and my friend wasn't answering her phone, and all I could think was, dear God, I hope the neighbors do not see me right now, because how ridiculous do I look having thrown my bags up onto the porch, and now I'm literally butt scooching up because there's no way that I can get into this house any other way. And everybody else is in the back being very loud with music. And it's like, I'd like to get there, but I can't get up these 3 stairs. The built world was not built for people like me. So if you can take that into consideration, and I am happy to, maybe not in the next few weeks, but after the holidays, I am happy to consult with any and all of you. If you have questions or want advice, because there are so many people in my community who are shy about talking about these things because we've been so derided and bullied and ignored. And don't look at that person, honey, to your child, because we're different. We look physically different, and or we act physically different, or we act neurotypically different. That's a thing. And half the time I'm like, you know what? Look at me, see me. I'm a person who moves differently than you. I want you to see that. I one time, right after I got my shunt, I was walking in the mall during the holiday season, actually, and I was really warm, so I'd pulled my hat off because I had dressed for the air outside and not for Westlake Center. And I was with a friend, and I walked by this adorable little boy, and he pointed at me, and he was like, Mommy, that girl's growing a horn out of her head. And it was the cutest thing ever. But his mother was like, don't point, don't. And I was like, I would love for him to come over and chat about my horn, because, there's nothing like the innocence and the imagination and the intelligence of children. My kid does it all the time, and I encourage it because I feel like we need to be talking about this more. And the people who are willing to talk about it, like myself, need to be heard. So if you need advice or have questions about how to make your store, more accessible for wheelchairs or people in walkers, feel free to call or email me, and we'll set up a time to Zoom, and I will answer any and all of your questions. I'm so happy to do that.
Thank you, Annie. One very last question. You mentioned the ADA, and I feel like the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, has been invoked more in the last 6 months in the United States than maybe ever before by people who do not want to wear a face mask in your store. Can you talk to us about how booksellers can handle that situation?
Indeed, I can. Well, and I'm going to read first. This is my last reading of the night. And then I definitely will talk about that with my fellow booksellers. This year, 2020, we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the ADA being passed into law. And we are still fighting against the able-bodied community that would like to adopt those laws for their own ease and comfort. Slapping a vest on your dog does not make it a service animal. Printing cards claiming you can't wear a mask for unknown ADA and HIPAA reasons does not exempt you from wearing a mask in my shop. People who can legitimately not wear masks for medical reasons are asking those able-bodied people to stop adopting our protections for their own. Seriously, stop it. We have had to figure out how to circumnavigate COVID-19 and so many other instances where the able-bodied community tries to take on our laws and use them against us, because they do make life easier. They really do. They make disabled lives so much easier when regularly enforced. That is not an open door for everyone to jump through who feels like they can survive the fall. Careful, you might find your way to my community after all. This adoption of our laws and protections also illustrates how disposable, able-bodied people think disabled folks are. These requirements are laid down to keep me safe and allow me ways to make my life easier. They were not intended to invite able-bodied people to disregard why these laws are in place. So there's, I want to go directly to a really fantastic TV show, and some of you may have watched it. It's on Hulu. There's 3 seasons and stars Minnie Driver, and it's called Speechless. And it's about a family who the oldest son has cerebral palsy, played by an actor who has more mild cerebral palsy. It is fucking hysterical. And the pilot, the pilot is so fantastic. I watched the first 5 minutes, and then I had to pause it and wait for my husband to finish putting my kid to bed. And then I had to get him in the room, rewind, go back to the start of the first 5 minutes, because it is literally about parking in handicapped parking. And Minnie Driver takes to task this woman who gives her guff. If nothing else, just watch the pilot. It is so funny, but it is also so freaking intelligent and so insightful for the disabled community. All 3 seasons are. And it was written by one of the producers and writers for Friends. I'm forgetting his last name is Silvery, I think. I'm forgetting Scott Silvery, I think is his first name. I forget names really easily. So it is well written. It is well acted. It is fucking hysterical. But also every single episode, I was yelling at the screen, yes, yes, yes. And I feel like if more people watched it, they would get a taste of what it's like to live in my community, even if you've experienced temporary disability or you have someone in your life who's disabled. It's just a really humorous take on some very serious issues. So I would say for those of you who are getting people who say, well, I can't come into your store without a mask. So here's my ADA card. There's no ADA cards. No one is printing ADA cards or HIPAA cards. HIPAA actually has nothing to do with the ADA. It's in regards to clinics, medical professionals, and hospitals saying that they cannot give out your medical information to just anyone, or your files or your history or anything to just anyone on the street. You know, if someone comes in and says, well, I'd like to see the files for Anastasia Carl, actually, can you give those to me? No, but that's what HIPAA is in regards to. It has nothing to do with I guess people could invoke it saying, no, I don't have to tell you what's wrong with me if they have a disability. But honestly, it really has to do with medical records that live in clinics and hospitals and with medical professionals. So if someone quotes HIPAA at you, just smack them. Really and truly. But the ADA is not printing cards. If you get a card, it's not a thing. If you ask that person if they can do curbside, you all know this, engage your customer service. Say, well, I can do curbside for you. I can ship to you. When I reopened in June, when it was safe for me to open my shop again, I got someone on my Facebook page who really got upset and was like, well, what if I can't come in your store? What if and I actually was like, then I'll do what I can for you. I could have a time when you come in and I've cleaned the shop and it's all Lysol down and you come in and browse for a half hour if you want to do that. I can ship books to you. I can put them out on the curb for you. But she was not satisfied with that answer. And it became clear that she was an able-bodied person trying to push my buttons. And I was like, lady, you have fucked with the wrong person, because I know all about this. I've been dealing with this my whole life. And now suddenly the rest of the world has to deal with it. So you just shut the fuck up. And I know that's not good customer service, but I, at that point, was triggered because my medically related PTSD was like in high gear. And I've been working with my therapist on that all year. I was nervous about opening my shop, and I was pissed off at seeing people who were adopting the ADA because they didn't want to fucking wear a mask. Fucking wear your mask. You should yell that at people who won't wear a mask in your store. I don't care about customer service. It's more than that. It's an issue that no one wants to address because it's not a hot issue. People with disabilities have been murdered by able-bodied people for nigh on thousands of years, back to Neanderthal times when we were all tribal and moving around in tribes. People like me didn't live out of infancy. And if we did, we were probably killed by the tribe because we slowed the tribe down. And since that's some deep historical, cultural memories right there. So throughout history, which I also talk about a little bit institutionalization of disabled people. It's a real tough thing. And yes, people of color, LGBTQIA, all of them have their own individual issues with death and being murdered and all sorts of awful things. And this doesn't negate that, but this is also a very serious issue in my community. There is actually a quadriplegic Black man, and NPR did an article about this over the summer in July, who was killed because he went into the hospital with COVID-19 and his doctor decided to kill him because he didn't think that his quality of life was worth keeping this man alive. And I cannot tell you how rageful and sorrowful and think about that. Sit with that for a minute. That someone else decided that this man's quality of life was not worth helping him get through COVID-19. His wife has video of it. is horrifying. And not everything in my community is horrifying. I have a lot of friends who are really amazing people, but the way we've been treated historically, culturally, and by society, by fiction, by media. Someday I'm going to meet Jojo Moyes and I'm just going to smack her as hard as I can. I'm not a physically violent person, but I'm just going to smack the heck out of that woman. The more you can work to help people in my community by just being friends, by treating us like humans. We're humans. That's all we are. Maybe offering a chair the next time you see me at PNBA. But that's the thing, you know,
wearing your mask.
Right, wear your fucking mask. I don't need help all the time. I just look like I do. So I get offers of help all the time. I really usually don't take on more than I can physically. Yeah. So if you offer to help and I say, no, thank you, I'm fine. Really, listen to me. I'm really fine.
On that note, listen to disabled people about what they need for themselves. That's a great, I feel like if you were to summarize that zine, and also maybe don't write some story where they're monsters.
And or if you're going to write a story with a disabled person in it, do your research. Please do your fucking research.
So you can get My Tropey Life from Annie directly, from Microcosm, from all of these bookstores here. Mm-hmm. Also, Ingram has it. It's going to be up on Bookshop pretty soon. All places that books are sold. We almost got it up on Bookshop for this event. I think the supply chain just like wasn't quite in the middle. But we have about 10 minutes left, I think. Do we have any questions? Does anyone want to ask Annie something? Follow up, share your own experience?
I promise I won't rip your head off. I only sound angry. I am really angry, but I only.
I was going to say we should mention that Books in Common Northwest does not endorse the smacking of people. However, we do endorse the sentiments behind encouraging the smacking of people. So the fine distinction I'm trying to make. But I guess I have a question, and I know the answer to this is really both. But would you prefer, Annie, to see more media representations of what it's like to live with disability, or books about completely different things that just happen to include realistic and representational disabled characters?
The second. Always and forever, the second. There are 1,000,001 biographies out there about living with disabilities. There are 1,000,001 self-help books and health books and all kinds. I don't carry these biographies in my shop for a reason, because a lot of them are bootstrapping. A lot of them are inspiration porn, which is a term coined by Stella Young, who is a Australian disabled woman. And she in a speech, she said, I'm not your inspiration porn, and I would prefer not to be your inspiration porn star. So really, we are just people, and maybe we live a little bit differently, but I think everyone lives a little bit differently than their neighbors. So I would so much rather, in fiction and media, movies and TV are so problematic for so many minorities anyway, and just we've seen some shifting in that, but not a lot in the last few years. And I would really love for people with disabilities and all kinds of disabilities. I think that's another major issue, is that disabilities can't be pigeonholed. You know, you have neurotypical people, you have mentally disabled people, you have physically disabled people, but you have different kinds of physically disabled people. And you have people within those. Someone like me who was born with exactly what I was born with might not have the same issues that I have. So it is, but that's the way it is. We are all different from each other. So I think I would really just like to see disabled people, being characters, you know, having their own lives, navigating those lives with the challenges that are set before them. You know, if you have a wheelchair, I think if you really want a great little taste of it, and you like Queer Eye, which I love Queer Eye, there's an episode where they work with a man in a wheelchair, and the guy who does the food, Anthony, They take them grocery shopping, and they literally didn't realize that spices up high, if you're in a wheelchair, you can't reach them. So it's like, I'd really love to see disabled people who are people in movies and TV. I think disabled people need to be let in. We need to be writers. We need to be screenwriters. We need to be directors. We need to be actors. I think that's how you shift change. That's how you get change going. Yeah. Anyone else?
I have a question for you that I could probably ask the next time I see you, but
hey, friend.
I've been thinking a lot about what you said, mentioning teachers and thinking about bringing disabled representation into my classroom, because those jerks not wearing masks and able-bodied people who are taking advantage of systems designed to support disabled people, I can mitigate much of that by setting an example early on in my classroom and sending those kids on with a more open awareness of what it means to be able-bodied disabled. So I'm wondering, I guess, I can't obviously smack kids if they bring their parents' negative views and closed-mindedness and whatever into the classroom. But I'm wondering about the media that I share with them, and if you have any recommendations for how to seek out. I'm still becoming familiar with toxic versus not toxic versus inspiration porn, and I'm not as clear on it. So I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for books or media or sources of books and media that I can investigate to help my students.
If you're looking for specific disabilities, there's all kinds of groups. So there's like the Leukemia and Lymphoma Foundation. That I had stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma 12 years ago. There is the Neurotube Defect Association. There's the Alzheimer's Association. I mean, there's 1,000,001 associations, and they usually have really good information on their websites about the different issues that you're talking about. And you could probably, as a teacher, because I know you're a really great teacher, Tessie, you could probably take that information and create something that's more manageable for your students. There's some books. I have children's, so my disability and fiction section is a mishmash of age ranges. It goes from children's books all the way through adult books. I think a really great place to start is Just Ask by Chief Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She includes a lot of disabilities in there. She herself has diabetes, and I don't know who here was at Book Expo in 2019 and got to see her speak, but it was really powerful for me. My mom and I went and saw her speak, and it was one of the few times that I actually used my disability to get to the front of the line, because by that point it was the end of the day and I couldn't stand in lines anymore. I was just gonna crap out. And they let us in early, and so we got a table right up at the front. And so I would highly recommend picking that up. It's a picture book, but I think it's really brilliant because she talks about a lot of different kinds of disabilities. She includes a child with Tourette's, which I don't think is talked about as much as it should be. That's a really serious disability. She has obviously a child with diabetes, a child in a wheelchair, but she really approaches it with such humanity. Like, these are just children, and here's how they're navigating through their childhood. And that's exactly, I didn't realize there was anything really wrong with me until, wrong with me. And I did know that not all kids go to the doctors as much as I did when I was a child. Some go more, some go a lot less. So I can give you a list, Tess, also, but most of the books that are in the disability and fiction section actually are children's books. There's the Elena K. Arnold series, Bat, A Boy Called Bat, I think is the first one. And it's about a young boy with autism, and he befriends a skunk, and it's so cute. And it's just him being autistic and being friends with having a pet skunk. And it's the cutest thing ever. And she did such an amazing job writing about a little boy with autism. And so I think, like, as with neuroatypical disabilities, there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum for all of us, and we fit somewhere. And so I think if you want to research a specific kind of disability, there's all kinds of organizations out there that do that. And you can go to their websites, you can Google them. You can Google lipomyelin if you know how to spell it. You could Google alopecia. You could Google autism. There's all kinds of resources on this wild thing we call the interwebs.
Hi, Annie.
Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, well, or I'm going to jump in here for a minute if I can.
Yeah.
Because 36 plus years of experience. So I had two ideas for Tess and for the community listening to you.
Real quick, Mom. This is my mom, Nancy TG. She and my dad are amazing and have been my advocates since before I knew what that was.
Okay. So you said real quick. So let me.
Okay.
Yeah. So we uncloaked. We didn't want. Okay. Number one, when you were young, we found ourselves at a thing at Seattle Center and just stumbled into it. But they were doing basically what was a sensitivity training opportunity for children. And so they had wheelchairs, they had safe eye covering, they had headphones. So, you know, those are just the simple, obvious ones. But to give children a chance to experience what it might be like to have blindness, deafness, or not be able to have mobility without using a wheelchair. So that's something that in our current environment you can't do, but you know, maybe in the future. But I had a very profound experience when we first moved over here, working with the school district, and I ended up going around to all the different special education classrooms over a 3-day period and interviewing special ed teachers and meeting students because I knew your experience, but I wanted to get a much broader experience. And then out of that, I created a program that I took to all the PTAs in the school district because nobody had any idea what special education meant or what it was doing for our students and how vitally important it was. And it was always a battle to keep it budgeted and so forth. And I would encourage, again, I don't know how you would do it in these circumstances, but the process of interviewing and listening and then gathering that information and giving it back to a community that isn't familiar with it can be extremely profound. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Mom. Like I said, my best advocates from moment one.
Love you, dear.
They still are. I love you too, Mom. Anyone else? Okay.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. Yeah, it was fantastic. I don't think we've had any moms or dads in our events before, but so that was a good way to finish off the season.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Again, if you have questions or want advice or maybe have a specific customer or even a person in your family and you're just not quite sure how to connect, there are so many people in my community that are shy or not willing to, or just have had such a shit experience in their life that they just don't want to have anything to do with it at all. Oh, thanks, Suzanne. I have a lot of ragey feelings that are personal and that are tied to our society and our culture. But if I feel I'm one of those people that I feel like if I don't speak up, who will? You know, I feel an obligation, and it's not an obligation. So if you need advice, if you have questions, if you want books, if you want titles, if you just want to have a chat, this little zine that Elly and I created, and Joe also, and their fabulous editor, Margot. I'm pronouncing their name right. Yeah, Margot. This is a drop in the bucket. This is 8,000 words of kind of my research and my experiences. And oh, thanks, Janice. I would encourage you, if you are curious, if you want more information, talk to me, but also maybe explore your own, explore on your own. Yeah, do a little research. If you have something specific that you're really interested in being engaged about, we don't just need disabled advocates, we need able-bodied allies as well. Just like any minority group, we really need people who understand and are allies and are willing to help the disabled community. So, all right, I could ramble on forever. Those of you that know me know that I could just keep blathering on. So yeah, reach out if you need to. I'm here for all of you. Maybe
Thank
after
you
the
so much,
holidays.
Annie.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
It was great to have you. And happy holidays, everybody.
Yes. Happy holidays.
We'll see you all in the new year again. I hope.
Bye.
Bye.